Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about Amy Beach's Gaelic Symphony and Piano Concerto. They are part of the Dave's Faves series, and here they are in the best available versions on Naxos, featuring Kenneth Schermerhorn and the Nashville Symphony Orchestra with Alan Feinberg playing the piano. One of you wrote me a note and said, my orchestra is doing the Gaelic Symphony next month, and I want to know if you talked about it and where I could find it. And I guess I didn't, and I feel terrible about that. I should have. I mean, I've only done 1,700 videos so far, so, I guess there's no excuse for not bringing it up. But I went and I searched, and I didn't see it. And so maybe if I don't remember, well, you'll tell me. I might have thrown in a list of something or other. I probably did. But that's okay. We should talk about this recording because this is the Beach recording that you must have. Now, let's talk about the lady herself and where she stands in the world of contemporary music, because it's rather interesting. In the world of music today, I don't mean the world of contemporary music, I mean the contemporary world of music. I think that makes more sense. So her dates were 1867 to 1944. She was married to a doctor, and so she was known as, in her career, now we just call her Amy Beach, but in her life, she was known as Mrs. H.H.A. Beach. And her name at the New England Conservatory, her nickname rather contemptuously, was Ha Ha. People would talk about Ha Ha Beach. And yeah, that was, not really cool. And nowadays, of course, if you said something like that, you'd probably be arrested or sued or something like that. But anyway, she was a composer of really serious gifts. She was a good, solid composer. Most of what she wrote was written for the Boston salons of her day. She was a Boston Brahmin, as they say in the biz. And, so she wrote mostly songs, mostly piano pieces, some fabulous, fabulous chamber works, and these two absolutely magnificent orchestral pieces. Well, one of them is, and one of them is not quite. The one that is the Piano Concerto. The Piano Concerto is a first-class piece of writing. It really is. Maybe because she was a pianist. It's got wonderful tunes. It's in 4 movements. It has a delightful scherzo, which is a perpetual motion, a perpetuum mobile. It's rather funny and interesting because, Prokofiev's second piano concerto also has 4 movements, the second one of which is a perpetuum mobile. You can be bloody sure that he had never heard Ha Ha Beach's piano concerto when he wrote his own. It's just one of those cool coincidences. And then a lovely slow movement and a zippy finale. The tunes are first class. The orchestration is piquant and delightful. The piano writing is delicious. And Alan Feinberg plays this really, really well on a strangely twangy sounding piano, as I pointed out in my review on ClassicsToday.com, which you can also take a look at if you feel like it. It's over there, and it's a free review for everybody to see. But, it's really a great work. A wonderful, undiscovered work. It should be played. It's better than like McDowell's piano concertos, I think. I really do. And, she's in an interesting position. And that position is highlighted by the circumstances surrounding the composition of her Gaelic Symphony, Opus 32, the symphony in E minor. Do you know the key E minor? That's like the same key as Dvorak's New World Symphony. And that's the work that inspired the Gaelic Symphony. Now, the New World Symphony inspired a whole host of imitations. Possibly the best of them was Hamilton Hardy's Irish Symphony, because it was just such a smash hit. But what happened with the New World Symphony is rather interesting, is that, it caused an enormous amount of controversy because it appeared at the same time that Dvorak was saying that, a true school of American music can be based on African-American spirituals and Native American folk music. And that horrified the establishment, particularly in Boston, because you have to remember, the American capital for classical music culture in those days was Boston. It wasn't New York. New York was polyglot. New York, as Dvorak sort of proved, and more receptive to that sort of thing. the Boston critics and the Boston musical establishment was straight up and down German and Irish and British and, white European 100%. Of course, they sort of were in New York too, but it was less of a thing than it was in Boston, because Boston was a much more insular city than New York was. And so Mrs. Beach wrote her symphony as an answer to Dvorak's New World Symphony. She was out to demonstrate that the Irish Anglo-Saxon cultural influence was just as legitimate as the, African-American and Indian, and indeed more so. It certainly was more naturally so, because that was the culture that created this art music in the first place. So that was like a big brouhaha. And in that brouhaha, the Gaelic Symphony appeared. Now, is it as good as Dvorak's New World Symphony? Of course not. I mean, is it as successful? Of course not. Otherwise, we'd have been listening to it all along. But here's the fun part that I think is just fascinating. It's the fact that Beach, had she been male, would have been completely reviled for having written in today's culture, today's academic culture, not in the real world, but I mean in the strange intellectual bubble that is academia. She would be reviled for having been a white cultural supremacist who was trying to assert the hegemony of traditional Western European white culture over that of all other cultures, which is exactly what she was trying to do. I mean, there's no question that's what she was trying to do. On the other hand, she kind of gets a pass because she's a woman. So she's at the intersection of two sort of confrontational academic problems. And I know that not only do I know this is an issue because I've read everything about it, and because I've been in the middle of it myself in my own academic work and whatnot, and I've seen quite a bit of it, and I've had to edit essays where that kind of thinking slinks into the essay, whether it's appropriate or not. And we've had many discussions about those issues. But I did in my symphony talk, my 10 big symphonies, where I talked about the New World Symphony, somebody sent me a lovely comment that said, well, you may know something about traditional music history, but you are completely ignorant of racial theory in music, current racial theory and black music. So that was a comment that was ripe for instantaneous deletion, even though I just told it to you. But the reason I told it to you is because it shows you where some people are when it comes to this foolishness. It's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I talk about classical music, and I don't care who writes it, whether it's white ladies in Boston or black ladies like Florence Price or African-American other people or Indian, American, whatever you call them, whatever we choose to call them these days that's more politically correct. All I care about is the music, and whether it's good music or bad music. Now, where does that put Mrs. Beach? Well, the Gaelic Symphony is a very decent traditional effort in late romantic terms. It's much closer, to sort of Brahms probably than Dvorak. And it is close to that whole English school of Stanford, and Parry and to a certain extent Hamilton Hardy's Irish Symphony, which just has many more folk tunes. You might think of Sullivan's Irish Symphony as a better example. That's where she was coming from, the Leipzig school. And it's a symphony in that tradition. It has some lovely, lovely tunes. It's not overly long in this performance. It's 42 minutes. The slow movement, which is a substantial piece, 13-minute lento con molto espressione, is quite beautiful. It really is. The first movement is a little galumphy in its handling of form. Like I said, I think Beach was more comfortable dealing with concertos because they were for her instrument, and she could simply create a wonderful orchestral frame for the solo part. But it's a beautiful symphony, absolutely lovely. And if the fact that she's a woman gets it played, where had she been a man it would have been reviled, good for her. I mean, she deserves the attention. She was a talent. And what her racial theories were and all of that stuff, who cares? Seriously, folks. We live in a time where there is nothing more ahistorical. Just intellectually cheap and sleazy than imposing today's alleged values, because who knows how many people really have those values, what academia has defined as today's current trendy values on people who lived 100 years ago or 200 years ago or hundreds of years ago. I mean, I'm Jewish, right? We all know that. If I decided not to listen to the music of anyone who was anti-Semitic because anti-Semitism is bad, and I don't think that that's a current theory. In fact, a lot of the current theory is sort of going in the opposite direction, much to my distress. But if I decided to ignore all those composers who were anti-Semitic, I wouldn't be listening to half of the music that had ever existed. You know, we don't judge people on their daily lives. They may have liked disgusting food. They may have had terrible personal habits. I mean, Beethoven was gross. He was an alcoholic. He was disgusting. I mean, you know, he had horrible personal hygiene. Are we going to ignore anyone whose personal hygiene did not meet modern standards, or whose, you know, intellectual capacity didn't meet modern standards? I mean, I find the whole discussion to be simply a cheap and sleazy way for a bunch of mediocre academics to try and get themselves tenure and to try and shame other people into giving them a job so that they can tell us how awful we are and get paid for it. And who wouldn't want that kind of a job? Well, Amy Beach is in that circle now. She's getting a lot more attention than she used to because she's female. And the people who are giving her the attention are kind of glossing over her other positions when it came to the musics of non-white or ethnic minorities. And I think it's just marvelous because she's a real, you know, here, stick this in there and twist in the breeze kind of composer. But she's also a good composer. So on the one hand, there's the intellectual side of things, which I can't resist talking about because it's just too juicy to ignore. But then there's also the music, and the music speaks for itself. It's good, solid, charming, intelligent music with the piano concerto, as I said, a more fully realized and developed piece. It's also a later work. That's their opus 45, whereas the symphony is opus 32. But it's a bloody fine symphony. And it deserves to be performed, and if you listen to it, you're going to enjoy it. This performance is terrific. There are only a couple other performances. The main competition comes from Nimi Yarvi on Chandos, which is quite good, but I think this one's a little better. It's a little bit slower, a little bit more, I think, loving in its treatment of the tunes, and a little bit also more emphatic rhythmically, but they're both very good. And there you go. Give it a shot. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.